Now, let's take a closer look at some stories in Behind the Headlines. The worst violence between Israel and the Palestinians in a number of years has left people asking why the international community doesn't more to stop the violence. Pakistan's The Dawn newspaper reports on exactly where the global community stands. Her father was a Republican and famous US vice president, but Liz Cheney has become famous for her outspoken criticism of Donald Trump. The New York Times has more on the decision to oust her as one of the Republican Party's top politicians. Here in the United Kingdom, the Daily Mail has more on a warning to the Kremlin that it must do more to stop the worldwide ransomware attacks, which are being blamed on Russian hackers. And Leonardo DiCaprio's movie Catch Me If You Can becomes another real-life story, this time in Spain. The Telegraph's headline talks about a student who became Spain's most notorious gatecrasher. He has now gone on trial in Madrid for posing as a royal envoy. Well, I'm joined now by the French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani and the political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. It's a solemn duty. We have to talk about more loss of life on both sides of this conflict, Ramila. And as I was reporting in the early part of our programme tonight, there seems to be no sign of any reconciliation at the moment.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think that the most pertinent word to use in relation to the international response to what is going on in Israel and indeed in the occupied Palestinian territories is the word predictable. As so often happens, affiliations kick in and people respond to the unfolding horror according to their allegiances. And this sadly often overlooks the human tragedy, meaning that mass casualties are being overlooked by those who are far more interested in power politics. To give you an example, the UN Security Council is currently meeting, but it is regularly blocked by the US, of course. And what Washington is now doing is it's sending a senior envoy to meet with Israeli and Palestinian officials. Hadi Amar is not the president, of course. He's not even America's Secretary of State, but he's high up in the State Department and he specializes in this never-ending conflict. And de-escalation is obviously the short-term priority, but in the long term, there needs to be a fundamental change in the way this conflict is being handled by the Western powers. And I would suggest that ending the overwhelming bias America shows towards Israel at all times would be a good start. The official message is always that both sides have the right to peace and indeed prosperity, but this is seldom applied to the Palestinian people. But what seems very clear is that there is no military solution to the problem, and yet Israel continues to think that its overwhelming military superiority should immediately and indeed ultimately decide everything. And it is inevitably supported in this frightening position by the West, and not least of all by the US, which gives it, billions of dollars of armaments. And thus America is always expressing a concern about what's going on, but ultimately is always coming down on the side of its all-powerful ally.
Well, let's see what happens this time around, Nabila. Nigel, it's horribly familiar, this, isn't it? It seems that throughout my journalistic career, I've been reporting on this loss of life and bloodshed as the Israeli-Palestinian problem seems intractable. Do you think this time it'll be any different?
Well, sadly, it doesn't look like it by the reaction from the West. I mean, both the UK and the EU have come out with pathetically weak statements about this. You've got America talking about Israel's right to defend itself, which of course it has. But the question here is this proportionate? And by look at the images we're seeing coming back from Gaza, the answer is no, it's not. So as far as I can see, that if the UN Security Council can't agree, it does meet the conditions then for the UN to hold its own emergency session. But what's going to happen in the future is that Joe Biden, if he's really going to be a world-class peacemaker, has got to get to grips with the underlying causes of what is going wrong in this region. So we still have illegal settlement building. We're no nearer a two-state solution. And this is the kind of thing that if Biden is really serious about bringing peace to the area, this is what he's got to address.
Nigel, thank you. And let me come to you for our next story, which is about Liz Cheney. Now, the Cheney name, of course, familiar in American politics through the years. Dick Cheney was vice president. Liz Cheney, now, although she's been around American politics for many years, has actually just got a newfound notoriety, hasn't she, when she burst into the criticism of the former President Donald Trump. And the Republican Party seems to have turned on its own.
Well, it has, and I think it's a very sad day for the Republican Party. I mean, Liz Cheney has every right to say what she does, and equally, the Republican Party has every right to disagree with her. But then to remove her from the leadership like this seems to me to be an affront to democracy, the notion of free speech, and indeed the rule of law. Now, on the downside, it seems that Donald Trump still has a pretty strong stranglehold over the Republican Party. On the upside, because of what has happened, Liz Cheney, assuming she can survive censure in her home state of Wyoming, Liz Cheney then becomes the focal point for Trump opposition. The worrying sort of signs from this is that as she'll be replaced by a Trump supporter, it just enhances his chances of running again for the presidency in 2024.
Nabila, do you think that is a likelihood, or do you think he's going to be this controlling figure, choosing which Republicans gain the favour of Donald Trump and therefore maybe stand a chance in gaining power?
Well, I think this story is very much an indication of this scenario. We haven't been hearing a great deal about Donald Trump in the last few months, but this is clearly a sign that he has by no means disappeared and that his grip on the Republican Party is as powerful as ever. This is all about a secret vote removing Representative Cheney as the chair of the House of the Republican Conference for her continued repudiation of Trump's election lies. So this is about, the Wyoming lawmaker. As you said, she's the daughter of the former US Vice President Dick Cheney, and she held the third most senior Republican post in the House of Representatives since 2019. And to see that on Tuesday, she said that her party couldn't stand for truth if it upheld Mr. Trump's false claims that he won the 2020 elections. And, the House of the Republican will probably replace her this month with a Trump loyalist. There's no doubt about that. And I think the most important point here is that Trump caused huge problems for the Republicans, but he was also a proven election winner who still has a massive constituency in the US.
I just wonder, though, Nigel, if Nabila's absolutely right about that. The Republicans want to be a ruthless winning machine. If the stardust comes off the Trump name, and we've got quite a while to go yet before the next round of presidential elections, then they could turn on the Trump era quite quickly, couldn't they? And maybe Liz Cheney is one name they would turn to, if not to be the star of the show, to certainly lead the way to a Trump-free Republican Party.
Yes, I mean, this is indeed possible. I think the biggest danger of all this, though, is the Republican Party splitting. You've got, at the moment, 100 senior Republican politicians who fall on Liz Cheney's side, who are talking about forming their own breakaway party. So if the Republican Party wants to be an election-winning machine, this is not the way to go about it. All political parties need to have dissenters within them. That's what makes them thrive. And so if the Republicans want to get this right, they shouldn't be trying to stifle free speech. They should be encouraging it.
Now, Nabila, let's talk about this very modern problem we have of ransomware attacks, which many businesses all over the world have experienced. We've got that oil pipeline issue running up the eastern seaboard of the United States at the moment. And it's the UK foreign minister saying today that Russia should pack it in.
Yes, indeed, there appears to be no end to stories about Russian hacking. And there we have the British Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, issuing a warning to Russia about sheltering those behind ransomware attacks. And Raab said that Russia cannot just pretend that the attacks are nothing to do with them. But by this, he meant that he has no proof of Russian government involvement, but that the Russian state has a responsibility to prosecute the gangs and indeed the individuals responsible. And I think this highlights that one of the huge problems with so much cybercrime is that nobody really knows who's doing it, and that often the hackers are far more sophisticated than the state bodies trying to foil them. And this is, of course, very worrying indeed, as far as law and order in cyberspace is concerned. And Raab said that educational institutions hit by ransomware attacks earlier this year included schools, colleges, universities, and this affected their ability to teach during the pandemic via video calls and the like. So yes, there are hostile states to undermine the foundations of society and democracy in other states, but there are also plenty of non-state groups that want to do the same thing. And Raab actually described the cyber criminal as the industrial scale vandals of the 21st century. And I think this is absolutely right, although I would say that vandals is probably too weak a term.
Nigel, it is telling, though, isn't it, that security of these systems, which have become totally crucial to the way our life and times are lived and how our systems work, should be in so many cases so poor. You know, financial directors, whether they're in the public sector or in the private sector, need to wise up and equip their IT teams with better protection, don't they?
Yes, Martin, I absolutely agree with you. It seems astonishing that with technological development, we still can't protect things. And what is happening on the east coast of America with people queuing up for fuel because half of it's disappeared because of a ransomware attack just shows how vulnerable we are. I mean, I think one of the problems is that when it comes to Russia, there is increasing evidence that their intelligence services, SVR, FSB, GRU, our work hand in hand with organised crime, and hence the warning from Dominic Raab today. I think the great danger here is the whole thing could get out of hand because the West will start attacking Russia. And obviously, Iran and North Korea haven't got their hands clean in this one at all. But if ever de-escalation is called for in a conflict, this is it.
All right, well, let's now just consider this real-life version of the movie Catch Me If You Can, really. But it hasn't ended well, Nabila, has it? Because the perpetrator has ended up in court. Yes,
indeed. There have, it has to be said, been plenty of examples of people pretending to be royals over the centuries. And this is a story of a particularly effective young pretender. Francisco Iglesias, a Spanish con artist in his 20s, has gone on trial in Madrid for posing as a royal envoy, and he instigated all kind of scams using his false status, and he built up quite a nice luxury lifestyle for himself by effectively lying continually about how special he was. And I must say that looking at some of the stories you read about royals like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, you do wonder how this young man differed from the real thing. But he's in serious trouble now, and he may end up going to jail. His defense is claiming that he has psychiatric problems, so that might help his mitigation. But whatever the case, he doesn't sound like the worst kind of criminal, and you would hope he don't get punished too excessively. And I would think, too, that with a name like Iglesias, if he can sing, then his next career might be in becoming impersonator.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, that was my point I was going to make to Nigel. You see, there's criminality involved here. There's all sorts of mischief going on. But, you know, this goes in the sort of lovable rogue category, Nigel, don't we? We're quite intrigued that people are able to get away with these things.
Yeah, I mean, as Nabila says, most of the things he's done just seem to be for a prank. I mean, posing as a royal envoy to basically trick a businessman into lunch, getting there in a motorcade, hiring policemen, gatecrashing King Philippe's coronation, that kind of thing. They don't sound terribly serious. I mean, you kind of wish, because he is such a folk hero in Spain, it will end as happily as the movie did. And what he'll do is he'll start helping helping law enforcement authorities catch other people just like him.
Yes, or otherwise, Nabila, of course, he may turn to a film director and actually make a movie of his own life and show us how he got away with it all.
Well, absolutely, and I would say good luck to him. He seems to be very effective in what he does, and why not turn it into a story, as you said, the lovable rogue, I think would be a very, well, a non-criminal way of even making more money and keeping up with his luxury lifestyle.
Good to talk to you. Nabila Ramdani, thank you. And Nigel Nelson, thank you as well. Thank you both.